Here you see a priest of particular skill, not of flame, not of lightning, but of fist. Not the smartest priest in the monastery particularly, but one of immense faith. Faith in his god, or yours, because that doesn't really matter. The most important thing is that he has faith in himself. So much faith, in fact, that holy essence began to emanate from the one thing that he trusted the most, his hands. Capable of channeling this belief into weapons of radiance, this is a tarnish that smites foes with the force of his strength. The scriptures will forever tell the tale of Holy Hands Hank. This is a pure faith caster type build with a focus on physical type incantations, primarily those of the aspect of the Crucible and the Beast. This build is not about flinging spells from range. This build is about getting in the face of the enemy to crush them. Knockdowns and stance breaks are a very common thing when Hank is involved. As always, we will review the stats of this build, the equipment that we use, and of course its applications within the game. Since there is a lot of ground to cover, I have created timestamps in the description of this video in order to make it easier to navigate the content and give you the opportunity to skip straight to the part that interests you the most. Let's get started. With this build, I want to achieve two things. The first one is my own vision. I wanted to create a priest or cleric caster type build that focuses on close quarter combat. Taking advantage of the aspect of the Crucible, we are able to obtain big hitting incantations that provide a lot of hyper armor and stance breaking capabilities. And then, we take advantage of the Bestial Incantations to obtain low cost, easy to use options that provide answers to multiple different situations. The best part is that most of these options deal physical type damage, meaning that we do not have to worry about elemental resistances. Every spell works against every enemy. Furthermore, with a large amount of HP and very reliable defenses, we have the tools needed to trade with our enemies and force our advantage in close quarter situations. That being said, I understand that not every player will appreciate this playstyle, so the second objective with this build is simple: adaptability and versatility. This build is capable of transforming into any other kind of faith caster that you, my dear viewer, wishes. You want a Lightning Lord? This build can do it. You want a Pyromancer? This build can do it. Dragon Priest? Yes. Blood Mage? Yes. Fundamentalist? Fuck 'em. With just a few changes, you can turn my melee priest into whatever kind of priest you need. I will show you a few options later in the video. To reach this objective, we will be running the following stats. Start the game as a prophet. This class is the most efficient to reach the required stat block for this build, allowing us to make use of every rune level possible to its maximum potential. As the primary focus of this build is PvE, I have chosen to base it on rune level 150. Finally, this is the stats block that you want to end up with. 60 Vigor, 39 Mind, 12 Endurance, 11 Strength, 10 Dexterity, 7 Intelligence, 80 Faith, and 10 Arcane. There are many ways to reach these stats. Level up however you feel comfortable. That said, I recommend that you take the following path. As soon as you are in the lands between, the first thing to do is get your Vigor to 20. Survivability is more important than damage when you're just starting out a character. The second priority will be to get Faith to 30. This is the primary stat of the build. An early start on it will increase our damage and meet the requirements for our incantations. The third priority will be to get Mind to 20 and Endurance to 12. This will allow us to get more comfortable spellcasting as well as allow us to wear heavier armor for more defenses. The fourth priority is to get Vigor to 40. This will allow you to survive comfortably throughout the mid-game, letting you focus on your other stats. The fifth priority is to get Faith to 50. While going through the mid-game, we will need more damage and options. At this level, we will be capable of dealing an important amount of damage with most of the incantations in the game. The sixth priority is to top off Vigor at 60. This will put you at our required HP pool, granting you maximum security to withstand the hardest hitting attacks from the endgame enemies. The seventh priority is Mind to 39. After min-maxing the rest of the build, I placed all points remaining into this stat. The more FP that we have, the more time that we can spend casting continuously. This increases our total DPS and the build's comfort. The eighth and final priority is to bring Faith to 80. This is the final soft cap of the stat, and it will maximize the damage that we deal with all incantations, as well as with the weapons that we decided to use. So, why do we want these final stats? Allow me to explain. Vigor at 60 because I believe that it is the perfect amount of health to survive the hardest hitting attacks of PvE. This will give us a total of 1900 HP. It is the second cap for the stat. Going any higher really diminishes your returns, and honestly, I never go any lower. Mine at 39 because this is a caster build and we want as much FP as possible. In all honesty, we probably don't need it to be this high, but this build already has all of the other stats covered, so I dumped all my remaining points into it. In any case, more FP translates to higher sustained DPS. Endurance at 12 because it has been min-maxed in order to let the character use the weapons and armor that I prefer for this build. It is perfected to have 68.52% equip load. If you put less points, we lose the build. If you put more points, you are wasting them. Strength at 11 because it is the base level of the Prophet. It is already enough for the build, so we do not need to level this up at all. Dexterity at 10 because it is the base level of the Prophet. Again, it is already enough for the build, so we do not need to level this up at all. Intelligence at 7 because it is the base level of the Prophet. I'm sure you have realized that it is enough for the build, so we do not need to level this up at all. Faith at 80 because it is the absolute most important stat of the build. It covers the requirements of the incantations that we want to use, as well as their damage and the damage of our chosen weapons. Finally, Arcane at 10 because I am sure that you have guessed, it is the base level of the Prophet. It is already enough for the build, so we do not need to level this up at all. Moving on to the equipment, this is the basic layout of the build. The main focus of this character is close quarter combat. As this is a caster build, we want to maximize the efficiency and power of our casting. That said, we still want to keep the defenses of the build reliable to be able to competently deal damage up close. By mixing melee combat with close quarter incantations, we can achieve a true in-your-face playstyle. Starting with the armaments, the first thing that I want to bring to your attention is the double incantation seal setup. This is something that I use in most, if not all, of my caster builds, and it corresponds to what I like to call dual-wield casting. The basic notion of this technique is that we are able to take advantage of the damage boost that an incantation seal provides while it is in the offhand. Meanwhile, we'd cast with a stronger seal in our main hand. If you're interested in the details of how this works and its usefulness, you can check out the link in the video description. In any case, to increase the efficiency of our incantation damage, we will be using the Erdtree seal in the main hand as it provides us with the highest incantation scaling possible, while holding the Clawmark seal in our offhand to take advantage of the damage boost that it gives to bestial incantations. This is the basic spellcasting setup: cast with the main hand, boost with the offhand. That being said, do not hesitate to experiment when you make this build. Maybe it is better for you to cast with the offhand while holding the damage boosting seal in the main hand. This is completely acceptable. Figure out what is best for you in your particular scenario. Regardless of how you decide to set up your double incantation seals, we will always be keeping a pocket weapon for lesser enemies. In this case, I prefer to use the Cypher Pada. The two main reasons why I prefer to use this weapon are its weight and its damage type. First of all, Cypher Pada weighs 0.0 unit. This means that it is the perfect side weapon as it gives us the ability to take care of lesser enemies with melee attacks, saving FP without having to worry about any additional investment into endurance. And then, of course, we are interested in its pure, holy type damage. Besides the fact that it is very much within the flavor of the build, it provides us a good option to diversify our offensive. While fist-type weapons might not be the best, Cypher Pada is extremely good at going through shields. Not only is holy damage really good at bleeding through guarding enemies, we also have access to the weapon's Ash of War, Unblockable Blade. This helps us keep the offensive against turtling enemies, but it is also important to note that this Ash of War deals a considerable amount of stance damage. As a result, Cypher Pada serves as a really good side weapon that supplements our spellcasting perfectly. It supports the character's weaknesses and allows us to save FP by dealing with the lesser foes. With our weapons out of the way, let's talk about Talismans. This build has two objectives when it comes to talismans: survivability and damage. This means that we want to have a lot of HP to survive as many hits as possible, but also maximize the damage that our incantations deal. For these reasons, we are running the Earthly Favor +2 and the Crimson Amber Medallion +2 in order to get the HP values that we want. And then we have the Faithful Canvas Medallion and the Flux Canvas Medallion to give us that damage boost that we are looking for. With this setup, we will have a total of 2134 HP. Then, the Faithful and Flock Canvas Talismans provides us with an additional 4% and 8% incantation damage boost respectively. As always, these damage boosts are multiplicative, and that means that together they give us a total of 12.2% damage boost to all of our incantations. Later in the video, we will review the true total of the damage boost we receive from all sources. Alright, let's talk about armor. In this game, armor is extremely important. This is because this game has extremely good looking armor. Fashion Souls, or Elden Bling, however you prefer to call it, is at an all-time high. The concept for the fashion is an armored, hooded cleric. The most useful setup is the Confessor hood, alongside the Crucible armor, gloves, and legs. I believe that this fashion fits together very well while providing dependable defenses and extremely useful stats boost. Overall, this setup gives us a total of 30% damage negation, which is a fair amount of defense that allows us to be safe from most attacks. It also provides us with 63 poise, which is a perfect amount for PvE play as most attacks deal 50 points of poise damage. We will be able to tank a single hit from most enemies. Not only this, but it is also very important to understand that each piece of the Crucible armor set increases the damage that our aspect of the Crucible incantations deal by 4%. Remember that these are multiplicative values, so the total damage boost provided by the 3 pieces of armor is 12.5%. Later in the video, we will go over the full and complete damage boost that we get from all sources. Honestly, I am very happy with how this fashion turned out. It fits the idea perfectly and looks very clean. Not only this, but it also provides us with decent stats to support the character. It is a good compromise between looks and power. I enjoyed it a lot. When it comes to the spirit summon that we will use for this build, I decided that the best choice is the Mimic. First of all, it is my favorite summon in the game, and that alone makes me use it in almost every single build that I make. That said, it does come with strategic advantages. The main thing that this summon will provide us is extreme pressure on the enemy. Taking into consideration that the Mimic can use every single incantation that we have access to, that means that it will be able to knock enemies down on our behalf. This generates time and space for us, the player, to create additional damage opportunities. Furthermore, the Mimic can act as another entity that attracts aggro. If the enemies are focused on the summon, this provides us with more time to capitalize on big damage or strategic decisions. Thanks to our high HP and protective armor, the Mimic is perfectly prepared to tank multiple hits, and that increases its survivability by a lot. The result is simple. If the Mimic remains alive for a longer period of time, then it can deal more damage and further distract enemies. Finally, I am sure that you, my dear viewer, remember that the Mimic not only takes advantage of our incantations, but also the consumables that we have equipped on our tool belt. For these reasons, I prefer to keep sleep pots and frost pots ready so that it can further support our character with very valuable status effects. Overall, the Mimic is a force to be reckoned with. It deals damage, it takes damage, and it puts control on the table. It is an extremely useful tool for this build. Better said, it is an extremely useful tool for any build. As we have mentioned a few times, this character is focused on being a melee cleric that uses aspect of the Crucible and Bestial incantations. Obviously, we will be making a heavy investment in these kinds of miracles. The list that I will show you tries to provide an option for every situation, both offensive and defensive, and it would also diversify the answers that we have when facing the different problems that the game will present us. I use every single memory slot with this character, and every incantation serves its purpose. The list is what you see on the screen. Aspect of the Crucible, Horn, Tail, and Breath. Stone of Gurranq, Bestial Sling, Beast Claw, Golden Bow, Flame grant me strength, heal, and Flame cleanse me. The first two incantations that this build takes advantage of belong to the aspect of the Crucible. They are the Horn and the Tail. These are the basic close-quarter incantations to deal damage and set up further damage through the use of knockdowns and stance breaks. They are the ones that I use the most. The Horn on its own is a fantastic gap closer and a great source of knockdowns. This is the party starter. Most enemies in the game after being hit by Horn will be knocked down, and if they are not, then they will be staggered. This lets us generate more damage through additional setups. As for the Tail, this is the build's cleave attack. By this, I mean that it can take care of multiple enemies in a condensed group. It is the close quarters AoE of the build. Not only this, but Tail provides us with an incredible amount of stance damage, and it is very easy to break enemies with it. And then, of course, we can combine both of these tools to create an incredibly efficient way to deal with single targets. The Horn knocks an enemy down and sets them up for a fully charged Tail. This is enough to break the stance of most enemies. After that, we get an easy riposte. The final note on these two is that you can charge them to increase their power and their range. Aspect of the Crucible Breath is one of the best support tools that we have access to in this build. It is important to understand that while it will not be one of the most used incantations of the build, it serves two very important purposes. First, it is a sweeping AoE attack that allows the player to control larger groups of enemies. It provides us with a cone-shaped AoE with mobility that acts as a sweeping wave of damage. It also has incredible stagger potential, which further serves as a crowd control tool. Another useful characteristic of this attack is that it is a flowing motion. This means that it can go through open doorways and around corners. This helps us catch possible ambushes or hostile traps hidden among terrain and structures. It is an extremely useful tool both offensively and defensively. The second advantage that it provides us is its fire type damage. This helps the build by diversifying the damage types that it has access to, making it easier to counterpick specific enemies. Particularly, we can more easily deal with dogs or Miranda plants, which are shortly immobilized when damaged by fire. Overall, and like I mentioned before, Breath is not going to be one of the most used incantations in this build. That said, it is still one of the most useful. Stone of Gurranq is an incantation that we use a lot in this build. This is the primary ranged option for the character, and it provides us with three very important solutions. First, it is a great option for single target elimination. It combines good HP damage with fantastic stance damage. We are able to bombard enemies with huge rocks that keep pressure on them, but also break their stances very easily. These breaks lead to a riposte, and that can add up to a lot of damage. Much like Horn and Tail, it is a bread and butter of the build. And then, the second utility of this incantation is its ability to snipe ranged targets, removing them from the board. Elden Ring has multiple situations in which there are enemies out of our reach. Annoying enemies that shoot us with arrows or throw pot at us, and we are not able to damage them conventionally. Well, Stone of Gurranq allows us to take care of these enemies. Finally, one of the most useful advantages that Stone of Gurranq provides is the capability of pulling enemies away from packs. There are times when we face multiple high-priority enemies in a single group. Facing them together would be troublesome. This incantation allows us to split the group by luring one of the enemies towards our position. This lets us fight them 1 versus 1, a situation in which we have the advantage. Overall, Stone of Gurranq is an incredibly useful incantation that solves a lot of problems with a very low FP cost. Bestial Sling for this build is a back pocket option that takes care of a few situations that are very annoying, but might not necessarily come up often. First, it makes it easy to deal with flying threats. One of the most difficult things to deal with in Elden Ring as a melee-oriented build is airborne enemies. Bestial Sling gives us access to a wide, shotgun-like burst of damage that makes it easy to hit fast and mobile entities. The most common example for this would be the different types of armed hawks that we can find at Stormveil Castle or Castle Sol. While it is true that this incantation does not deal a lot of damage, it is also a fact that flying enemies tend to not have a lot of HP. As a result, it is a balanced option to eliminate these types of foes. Furthermore, there are some enemies that, while not airborne, are still very agile and they force us to land a hit in order to stop their movement. For example, rats or dogs. Bestial Sling allows us to cover a large area with rocks, and this makes it easier to stagger these enemies, slowing down their movement. Hopefully, this is enough to generate a damage opportunity. In all honesty, Bestial Sling is not an incantation that we use a lot, but having access to it makes me feel extremely comfortable. Beast Claw is a very good incantation. It serves the purpose of a strong AoE attack that can deal damage to enemies in a cone shape. Its utility is very similar to that of Aspect of the Crucible Breath, but it does have some differences that make both of them valuable in the build. First of all, Beast Claw deals physical damage while Breath deals fire damage. This helps with the diversification of damage types. Then, it is important to understand that Beast Claw has a lower FP cost, making it easier to use continuously. That said, Claw is not as oppressive as Breath is. Enemies are still able to charge you in between Beast Claw castings. As such, the key in this build is to understand when it is better to use Beast Claw and when it is better to use Breath. On top of this, I have to mention two additional characteristics of this incantation that increase its usefulness. Beast Claw can be charged, which means more damage and more range. And then, Beast Claw is an incantation that travels alongside the ground. This means that if there are any obstacles, it will be interrupted, but it also means that it will travel along walls. Indeed, this incantation is useful as it can crawl up walls and reach enemies that are located directly above us. It adds a tricky layer to the incantation that can prove to be very useful during certain situations. Adding this to its low FP cost, I believe that it earns its spot as a back pocket option. Golden Bow and Flame Grant Me Strength are the two buff incantations in the list that give us access to a surge of damage. It is an incredible amount of extra damage, but it runs on a timer. It is temporary. This means that we have to be careful in picking and choosing the moments that we will use them, as we have to take into consideration the hefty FP cost that they signify for the build. That being said, if used correctly, they are the perfect tool to deal with high priority difficult targets in a very quick fashion. This is particularly important in situations where we are not able to pull enemies from each other and are forced to fight multiple harder foes. Golden Bow increases the damage of all incantations, while Flame Grant Me Strength boosts both physical type and fire type damage. This means that all incantations are affected, leading to an incredible amount of damage. Later in the video, we will go over the full damage boost that we get from all sources. As a final note, remember that the Cypher Pada weapon deals pure holy damage. As a result, it will not get any damage boost from Flame Grant Me Strength. Overall, I do not keep these buffs up constantly. That said, they are a very important tool for spike damage opportunities. Heal is the only healing spell that I use. That said, its purpose is not exactly to heal myself. In fact, I use this spell for one thing and one thing only: to kill Revenants. Revenants are one of the most powerful and annoying non-boss type enemies that you can find in the game. They deal incredible amounts of damage and are in constant motion and attack. They teleport around the area and, I am sure you know, have that one move where they hit you 1,000,000 times with all of their limbs in succession. It is very difficult to fight them, but fortunately, if you do not let them get started on their offense, then they become much easier to defeat. In order to achieve this, we use Heal. Revenants are very weak to holy damage, but also they are extremely weak to healing spells. If you cast a healing spell with an AoE and it catches the Revenant, they will take damage instead of being healed. The amount of damage they take is always the same, 50% of their max HP. plus an additional 300 damage. 2 spells will always take care of them, and since the first spell also staggers them, it is very easy to cast 2 of them back to back for the kill. Since the damage is always the same, I like to use heal because it costs the least FP out of all the AoE heals. If you execute this strategy correctly, then you will defeat the Revenant before it even has a chance to hit you. Flame Cleanse Me is one of the most powerful incantations in the game. It provides a fast, cheap way to get rid of poison and, most importantly, Scarlet Rot. This should always be in your list of spells. Scarlet Rot is extremely annoying, and so is poison. This is especially harmful in Elden Ring because due to the size of the game and all of the exploring that we do, having a damage over time debuff like poison or Scarlet Rot is really bad for your resource management. Furthermore, it is good to note that this incantation deals a very minuscule amount of fire damage to you when you cast it. The damage itself is insignificant, but it is still fire type damage. This means that we can use this incantation to remove the effect of frostbite from our character. This is another dangerous status effect. As a result, Flame Cleanse Me becomes an indispensable tool to improve our comfort during exploration. Do not leave home without it. Throughout the video, we have spoken about the different boosts of damage that we receive from different pieces of equipment. Each damage boost stacks with each other multiplicatively. This means that each boost is multiplied into the next one instead of just simply adding them together. The result is that we get a much higher increase to our damage that we would normally get by applying each instance individually. The time has come to analyze all of the damage boosting gear in unison and figure out what is the total increase of damage that our incantations can take advantage of. You can see it on the screen. We have to divide 2 types of incantations, Aspect of the Crucible and Bestial Incantations. Aspect of the Crucible incantations are the Horn, the Tail, and the Breath. Meanwhile, Bestial Incantations are Stone of Gurranq, Bestial Sling, and Beast Claw. In this build, there are damage boosts that affect all incantations, and then there are damage boosts that affect only a certain type of incantation. As for general damage increase, we have the Faithful and the Flock's Canvas Talisman. These talismans increase the damage that all of our incantations deal by 4% and 8% respectively. This is a fixed increase as long as we have talismans equipped. Then, Golden Bow and Flame Grant Me Strength provide an additional incantation damage boost of 15% and 20% respectively. These are larger increases in damage, but they are only temporary while the buffs are active. Then, we have the incantation-specific damage boosts. The Aspect of the Crucible incantations get boosted by the Crucible armor set. Each piece of this armor set increases the damage of these incantations by 4%. Since we are using 3 pieces in this build, we apply this 4% 3 separate times. And finally, the Bestial Incantations get a damage boost from the Claw Mark Seal, equaling an additional 10% damage. If we calculate all of these bonuses and apply them to the corresponding incantations, we would get the following total damage boosts. For the Aspect of the Crucible incantations, we multiply 1.04 times 1.08 times 1.04 times 1.04 times 1.04 times 1.15 times 1.2 for a total of 1.7435572 rounded to 1.744, signifying a full 74.4% additional damage when using these kinds of incantations. As for Bestial Incantations, we multiply 1.04 times 1.08 times 1.1 times 1.15 times 1.2 for a total of 1.7050176, rounded to 1.71, signifying a full 71% additional damage when using these kinds of incantations. It is easy to see that correctly utilizing all of the different damage boosts that the game gives us is key to maximizing the damage of our incantations. Remember that damage boosts in Elden Ring are calculated multiplicatively, so even a simple 4% additional damage can go a long way on the battlefield. As always, remember to match the correct incantation type with the correct equipment, and never forget to take advantage of dual wield casting. The total damage potential is serious business. Throughout this video, I have shown you my vision of a pure faith caster that focuses on close quarter combat and physical type damage. An in-your-face brawler that punches with light, strikes with stone, and smites evil with pure will. That being said, this is not the only thing that you can do with the build. In fact, there are a lot of things that you can do. My dear viewer, you are capable of turning this priest into anything you want, except a fundamentalist. We don't do int faith here, just faith, all the faith. If you are interested in an int faith caster, I'll leave a link in the description that will take you to another build that I made. Right now, we are focusing on the many different priest type characters that we can make without having to change the build's stats. I will show you two alternatives that you can do with this exact same build. That being said, I recommend that you experiment to find exactly what suits you best. Let's take a look. One of the first archetypes that comes to mind when we look at incantations is the Pyromancer. With this build, we can make a very good Pyromancer by combining the flames of the giants with the god-slaying flames of the gloam-eyed queen. Equipment-wise, we use the Earth-Tree Seal to maximize damage, and then we use the Godslayer Seal and the Giant Seal in order to boost the damage of their corresponding incantations while taking advantage of dual-wield casting. As for a sidearm to deal with the weaker enemies, this build can use the Codex Sword very effectively, since we have a lower equip load from armor. Moving on to the incantations we can use, I show you a few options that use the Godslayer incantations as the bread and butter damage sources, and then we use the big giant incantations to provide the large area of effect damage. Of course, this incantation list that you are seeing is just some examples. After you pick your go-to miracles, do not forget to add Golden Bow and Flame Grant Me Strength in order to increase the total damage potential of this build. The Pyromancer has an average of 30% additional fixed damage from equipment, but these two buffs bring that to an average of 80%, and that's a lot. Overall, this type of caster is very specialized, meaning that it is very good at what it does, fire damage. That said, its strength can also be a weakness. If you fight a fire-resistant enemy, you will have to change strategies. The Pyromancer is a blasting damage-oriented priest that will fit very well with players that want large amounts of flashy damage. Build it and go wild. Another option that we have with this build is to make a Dragon Priest. There is already a Dragon Communion Cleric type build in the channel, and you are free to go check it out, but this adaptation offers a bit more versatility. In fact, we can take advantage of a lot of different damage types and status effects with this character type. Equipment-wise, we are running the same setup of Earth-Tree Seal to maximize incantation scaling in combination with the Gravelstone Seal and Dragon Communion Seal to provide additional damage to the corresponding incantations. Again, dual-wield casting is a mandatory technique for all pure caster builds. As for sidearms, we are also able to take advantage of the Codex Sword with this variation build, and that helps us deal with the lesser enemies. Of course, one of the most important pieces of equipment with this alternative priest is the Silver Tier Mask, as that gives us the additional levels in Arcane that we need to cast all of the Dragon Communion incantations. As for spells, there are a lot to pick from, but I like to use the lightning-based Dragon Cult incantations as the basic damage dealers, and then the Dragon Communion incantations to provide different status effects and debuffs that help defeat the enemy. With these choices, we have access to lightning, magic, physical, and fire type damages, as well as the frostbite and scarlet rot status effects. It is a very powerful combination. This type of priest is extremely powerful because of the sheer number of options that it puts on the table. There is nothing that cannot be counterpicked with this character. As you have seen, this build can be any kind of faith-based priest that you need. I started by showing you the build that I made using physical damage type incantations that excel at melee combat, and then I also showed you two other alternatives that you can use, the Pyromancer and the Dragon Priest, with these exact same stats. By just changing the equipment, you can make a completely different kind of character, and that is the biggest weapon that this build has. It can counterpick the damage weaknesses of all enemies in the game. All you need is the knowledge and the opportunity to adapt your incantation list. In this video, you saw 3 possibilities, but there are many more. You, my dear viewer, should experiment and see what kind of priest you can come up with. Player expression is maximized with this build, and it helps by making the character truly feel like your own. The best part is that the build can also do all of this without sacrificing damage. It is still an optimized pure faith caster. Also, let's not forget that there are many incantations that have defensive or support purposes. Overall, this build puts in your hands a fully customizable caster that can do exactly what you need it to do. I hope it serves you well. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope I get to see you on the next one.